Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. And today's guest needs no introduction. He is the author of numerous books, but the one we're going to be talking about is this one, James Holland, Sicily 43. He's on location for me from a secret location. I could tell you where he is, but I'd have to kill you. But I'll bring him in right now. Hi, James. How are you today?
Hello, Woody. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. So we're right bang in the middle of the 80th anniversary of Husky, and you know, it seems to always get short shrift compared to Market Garden, compared to Normandy, but it is a fascinating campaign, and you're going to take us through 10 facts we all should know about it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's an amazing campaign. It's got literally everything you could possibly want because it's an island story. So it's got, you know, a very obvious sort of start, middle, and end. It's got some of the greatest characters of the war. It's got Monty, it's got Patton, it's got Alexander, it's got some amazing Germans like Barda, for example, who's a terrific character. It's got all sorts of people, and it's got airborne forces, it's got special forces in the SRS, you know, Paddy Main as a SAS as it became again, but temporarily called the Special Raiding Squadron. It's got naval actions, it's got air actions, it's got land actions, it's got Canadians, it's got Americans, it's got Brits, it's got famous cricketers. It's got civilians. It's got amazing tales of daring do on mountaintop and hilltop towns, and incredible assaults. It's literally got everything. So there is no reason why it shouldn't be better known and better appreciated than it is. And I think it's a really interesting time because it's when the Allies sort of come together, really. You know, it's their first. I know Torch is an amphibious operation, but it's against a kind of sort of pretty lame opposition, and which has been primed already to kind of throw in the towel. And this is the first sort of major test where you're doing a kind of really monster amphibious invasion, and you know, and frankly, they pull it off, and it's incredible, really, when you think that America, you know, only joins the war in December 1941. And here you are, sort of a little over 19 months later, and you're mounting what actually ends up becoming the largest amphibious operation ever in history in terms of men dropped in the first 24 hours. It's 160,000, which is 5,000 more than were landed and dropped on D-Day on the 6th of June 1944. So, you know, for that alone, it's pretty big. And that's my first fact that everyone ought to know is in terms of manpower, it's the biggest one. Plus 2,590 ships, 14,000 vehicles, landed over 26 different invasion beaches over a stretch of land of 105 miles. I mean, that is an astonishing challenge logistically. And you know, you're carrying people from across North Africa, from Egypt, from Tunisia, from Algeria, from a whole host of different ports across the North African continent, and operating out of Malta as well. You know, so there's an awful lot of moving parts. There's an awful lot of things that could go wrong, and frankly, a lot of things do go wrong. But overall, it goes very much right. I mean, it is much more successful than its failure, and I think it's really impressive, and I think people should kind of appreciate that a bit more.
No, definitely. And we talked to him in our Torch series that Torch was probably the test of the leadership, the strains between the British and Americans and Canadians. And we're kind of over that hump now when we get towards Husky. But Husky is the test of the doctrine and the tactics. Have we got our methodology correct for amphibious landing? Because if we haven't, we're going to find out. And we've still got that second front ahead of us. So not that we're going to be talking about Normandy, but you can see that it is definitely part of a stepping stone along that route to getting better at taking the war to the Germans. But so fact one, more personnel than D-Day. Fact two.
Yeah. Well, just sort of on the back end of fact one and fact two is, you know, General Alexander, who is the overall land commander. He's the Army Group Commander of US 7th Army, which comes into being, incidentally, at midnight on the 9th, 10th of July. So that's the first operational army in the European theatre to be activated in the Second World War. And he says in June, you have to understand that the kind of air power, naval power, and land power is like a brotherhood, and they're all kind of inextricably linked to one another. And what you're seeing in Operation Husky is that writ large. You know, this is the moment where where Allied theories of coordinating air, land, and sea power together are kind of realised properly for the kind of first time, I think, in a single operation. And he's absolutely right, because you need air power to do all sorts of things. Air power is there to is to slow down the enemy's lines of communication, destroy their lines of communication. It's there to destroy the enemy air forces on the ground and in the air beforehand. It is there to support the naval operations, and provide fighter cover over the invasion as the invasion is happening. So you can see air power absolutely wedded to naval power. Naval power is obviously delivering your capability to, your invasion force. So that's where naval power comes in. And of course, without that, the land forces can't operate. But without the land forces, you can't actually take the island. So that's where that kind of brotherhood really, really starts to come in. And actually, my second fact, I suppose, is really looking at air power, and looking at air power in the kind of broad brush. And it's really interesting because between June and September 1943, 702 Luftwaffe aircraft are lost over the Eastern Front. But in that same period, 3,504 are lost in the Mediterranean. Which is a huge, huge difference. And a lot of people say, well, the Eastern Front, that's where the kind of the Germans were bled dry. That was the most important campaign and all the rest of it. Well, it depends how you're judging these things. If you're turning it in terms of Germany's sort of, ability to wage war, then the Mediterranean is just as important, because by 1943, nearly 50% of the German economy is spent on the Luftwaffe. And that is where the most of the Luftwaffe are being destroyed, is over Western Europe and in the Mediterranean at that time. And the bottom line is it doesn't really matter what we think is the most strategic. It's what Hitler thinks is the most strategic.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're talking about boots on the ground and numbers, obviously, the numbers involved on the Eastern Front are absolutely huge, but that's because it's a huge area. And I think you have to be really, really careful not to confuse strategic importance with numbers, because it doesn't necessarily follow. I mean, no one would deny, for example, that Guadalcanal was a battle of enormous strategic importance in the overall campaign in the Pacific, and yet the numbers involved were comparatively small, and that's because of Guadalcanal itself is comparatively small, and it's a long way from anywhere, and the logistics of it preclude it from being zillions of boots on the ground. It's kind of the same with Sicily. There's only kind of a limit to how many troops you can fit into that. But what you are seeing is a much greater emphasis on air power in the Mediterranean, and in that the Luftwaffe is absolutely hammered. And it's so amazing because if you look at something like Mackie Steinhoff's diary that he kept during this period, first opening days of the Sicilian campaign and just before it, what you see is you see a Luftwaffe, a fighter force of the Luftwaffe, and he's part of JG's is it 27 or 77? I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyway, he's commanding a fighter group, a Jagdgeschwader on Sicily at the time. And what you're seeing is a force that is utterly demoralised, that is fighting against an overwhelming enemy, against overwhelming odds. Replacements are coming in and getting slaughtered because they're just not qualified enough, they're not good enough for what they're doing. They're surviving with insufficient parts and supplies, insufficient fuel. And that is the language of British fighter pilots on Malta just a year earlier. It's a complete flip around. And suddenly in that 12-month, sort of 14-month period between kind of sort of May 1942 and July 1943, there's been this utter transformation where the tables have been completely turned. And suddenly it is the Luftwaffe that is feeling completely beleaguered and the Reggio Aeronautica, the Italian Air Force, whereas a year before it had been the other way around. It had been like the beleaguered RAF pilots struggling with, I mean, on one day in April 1942, there wasn't a single fighter plane in the RAF that could operate out of Sicily. And on 5 days in April 1942, only one fighter plane on the entire island was available. And yet, there you are, 40 months later, 15 months later in July 1943, and the whole of Malta has just become a kind of, a static aircraft carrier stuffed full of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fighter planes, all heading over to Sicily and meting out exactly the same kind of punishment that the Luftwaffe and to a lesser extent the Reggio Aeronautica were meting out on the RAF just a little over a year before. So it's an incredible transformation. And to put this into some perspective, and this is my kind of third point rather, just to stick with the supremacy of air power and the importance of air power in these landing operations, these amphibious operations, how key air power is that on the ground in the build-up between the beginning of June and the end of the Sicilian campaign, 322 Luftwaffe bombers were destroyed and 268 fighters were destroyed just on the ground. And in the air, that figure is 207 bombers and 700 fighters in the air by the end of the Sicilian campaign. So that's an absolutely colossal number, and a number that the Luftwaffe absolutely can't afford to lose. And that's before you add in the Reggio Aeronautica incidentally. That is just the Luftwaffe. And you think about the important role, the vital role that the Luftwaffe has played since the start of the Second World War and continues to play in the Second World War. And you think about what those losses mean to the Nazi high command and to the German war plans as a whole. It's very, very easy to be consumed by the enormous numbers on the Eastern Front and to ignore the huge strategic importance that the air war, just alone on its own, is playing in the Mediterranean at this time. And there's always this temptation to constantly see things in isolation. And of course, when you're looking at the Sicilian campaign, it's no good just looking at the Battle of Azoro or the Battle of the Catania Plain or what's going on in Gela and the panzers counterattacking at Gela, on the 11th and 12th of July, for example. You have to see this bigger picture, and you have to see how the Allies are sorting themselves out, and you have to see the impact that is being made on German war plans at this time by the huge amount of Allied air forces which have been amassed. And of course, air forces are a massive force multiplier for those on the ground, effectively.
Yeah.
You're doing a massive job. And this is absolutely part of the kind of steel, not flesh, kind of using air power to do a lot of the hard yards for you. And I would argue that you see in the high summer of 1943 over Sicily, before and during and immediately after the campaign, you see the absolute fruits of 2 years of building up to this moment by the Allies. The development of tactical air force, notions of close air support, that is being manifested here in Sicily with unbelievable success. And you can argue the toss about whether Sicily is a black mark in terms of the Allied war effort. I absolutely do not think it was. But you cannot argue against the absolute enormity and brilliance of the Allied air power and air battle in this campaign and this time in the summer of 1943.
No,
so that was
I mean, could you argue that the Husky was almost the high watermark of Allied air power? Because when you get to Normandy, leadership has shuffled its pack a little bit. They've changed their ideas a bit, and normally there's like a step back before they go forward again. Is that
I think they do? They definitely step back in terms of Italy, and that's because the subsequent follow-up invasion of Italy in September 1943. And if you're ever planning on doing anything on that, Woody, ask me back, and I would absolutely love to come and talk about it. Because what you see is a massive backward step. That you've got to, and perhaps this is my fourth point, is the landing, and the planning of Operation Husky is all about minimizing risk. This is a point where they just won in North Africa on the 13th of May. All that North African shores are now in Allied hands. There's this incredible victory at Tunisgrad. Colossal losses for particularly for the Germans, but also for the Italians. It's the absolute boot in the crotch of the Italian war effort. But Sicily is all about making sure that we don't balls up at this point, that we absolutely hammer home the advantage. And one of the big problems that they have at this time is that they're planning for Sicily, which has been agreed upon, the invasion of Sicily has been agreed upon at the Casablanca conference in January 1943. the planning for it is happening while they're still carrying out the Tunisian campaign.
Yeah.
That's not over while this is happening. And some of the key leaders, whether it be Alexander, whether it be Patton, who's commanding 2 Corps in March 1943, whether it be Montgomery, who's commanding 8th Army and will continue to command 8th Army in the invasion of Sicily. These guys have got their own, they've got their hands full with just the existing campaign, whilst they're still trying to plan for the next campaign, the Sicily invasion Operation Husky. And the problem is that the distances involved across the sea and the Mediterranean and conflicting requirements of the Navy, of the air forces, of the land forces, make it very, very difficult. And one of the big problems they've got, and this is why it takes 9 iterations of planning. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. You come up, there's been a lot of criticism about the planning for Sicily. That, they can make their mind up, they keep changing their mind, they keep tweaking with it and fiddling around with it. And eventually the 9th plan, which was agreed on Easter Day, late April 1943, and finally signed off at the very beginning of May 1943, only 2 months away from the operation and still 2 weeks or 10 days before the Tunisia campaign actually was drawn to a close when that final plan was agreed upon. That is somehow seen as a criticism, as though the Allies are constantly changing their mind and can't agree something. That's not the way to look at it. The way to look at it is, this is an unbelievably complex plan that has never been attempted before. And you've got to get it right. And there's conflicting problems. And the conflicting problems revolve around this. But basically, it is reckoned they're going to need 6,000 tons of supplies per day to run the campaign, to run it in the way that they want to run it, which is very material heavy, manpower heavy, resource heavy, ammunition heavy, medical supplies heavy, so that you're minimizing the risk of a setback. And the problem you've got is you've got one of ports. So you've got Messina in the top right hand corner, northeastern corner, which is the furthest point away from where they're going to be landing necessarily, because it's the furthest away from North Africa. That can take around 2,500 tons a day at full capacity. Then you've got Palermo on the north coast, but on the western side, so the opposite end of Sicily, 100 plus miles away from Messina, that can do about 2,000 tons a day. Then you've got Catania on the eastern side, which is, halfway up the eastern coast, because it's like an arrowhead. It's like a triangular arrow, like an old flint, one of those sort of napped flints that you see. That's what it looks like. That can do about 2,000 tons. So you've got a problem because you haven't got enough ports. So what are you going to do? And so do you try and do landings on the east coast to get up to Catania quickly and then get to Messina quickly, and on the western side? But then they're not mutually supporting. The land forces are not mutually supporting. They're two different ends. So you're dissipating your force. You're dissipating that massive Schwerpunkt, to use a German phrase, that concentration of force. And what do? Well, what you do is you hope that those beaches can take lots of landing craft and that you can actually land a lot of supplies without those ports. And what they realize in the end is that what they're going to do is, and also then you've got the problems that you've got airfields at the western end, at Trapani. You've got them at Trapani on the western side, and you've got huge airfields around Catania and just inland of Catania on the eastern side, and you've got them also in the southeastern corner. So again, the airmen are worried, because what happens if you only take the southeastern corner? You're still leaving the kind of the western side of those airfields, kind of they're in the hands of Luftwaffe. What do? And you've got a problem on your hands. So there's these conflicting issues. And the plan that they come up with is actually not to bother up over the western side and just go, okay, we're going to chance our arm. We're going to try and cover the whole kind of southeastern corner. On the southern side and the eastern side, we're going to link everything up with the 105 miles worth, which is still a lot, still a long distance. But at least then we can sweep up and we can get to Catania and then onto Messina as quickly as possible and not worry too much about the western side. And that's the plan that they go for. And it's unquestionably the correct plan. And Montgomery goes for a very boots heavy on the ground because he doesn't know what the defenses are going to be. You have no idea how many German divisions are going to be there. Might be 2, might be 1, might be 5. They know there are German divisions in the north of Italy. They could easily come down. You have absolutely no idea. The Italians have fought very well at the end of the Tunisian campaign. At Fidaville, to Kruna, places like this, they proved that actually they're pretty much okay. Now, what happens if you transfer that pretty good quality fighting plus fighting for their own patria, their own land in Sicily? What happens if they fight really, really tough? You know, and you haven't got enough. The last thing you want is to be kind of kicked back into the sea. So he goes for a boots heavy approach, but that then comes with a payoff, which is that the flip side of that is there's only a limited amount of shipping. It's a hell of a lot of shipping, but it's not enough shipping to do everything that you want to do, inevitably. And so the flip side of that is you don't have as many motorized vehicles as you might have if you traded shipping space for vehicles. You know, if you traded boots, you know, infantry space for vehicles. As it turns out, the response by the Italians on the coast is very poor. They throw in without a towel. They could have done it with much fewer infantry in the initial waves. But you don't know that. It's much better to be cautious and make sure that the amphibious invasion is a success, because that is the single most important thing of all in the Sicilian campaign, is that it doesn't fail. That trumps absolutely everything. And you can argue the toss, because you know what that means is that the British, the 8th Army on the eastern side, so you've got the Americans landing on the southern coast, on the western flank of the British on the south and southeast, and Canadians. The flip side of that is you can't get to Catania as quickly as you might do, and that gives the Germans, who are on Sicily, plus reinforcements, a chance to organise themselves and get themselves into a Hauptkampf linear, a kind of, you know, a main defence line in the northeastern side of the island, which they wouldn't have been able to do if the British, if 8th Army had had enough vehicles to just storm their way up. But that's been wise after the event. And as I say, the most important thing is that the amphibious invasion does not fail. That trumps absolutely everything. Because once you've got enough boots on the ground, you are going to win. Whether you win in 30 days or 40 days or 50 days or 2 weeks, that's sort of up for grabs, but you are going to win. Whereas if you've thrown caution to the wind and you've put too many vehicles and not enough men in, and the Italians then prove stiffer opposition, and there's more Germans there than you thought when you've signed off the plan at the beginning of May, you've got a big problem on your hands. So I don't take any truck with criticism of Monty for his plan, which a lot of people have done. You know, I think that was a sensible decision. And the fact that the Sicilian campaign takes a little bit longer than it might otherwise have done is the payoff you get for that caution. But the caution is the right way to approach it. Definitely.
No, I'm with you completely on that, and people loving it, by the way. So yeah, let's keep on going.
Okay, so I'm going to give you. So that's my big planning issue. I think I've done 4 points so far. So I'm going to give you one light-hearted one, which is Ike's record of swearing in the week beforehand. Ike being Dwight Eisenhower, huge amount of pressure on him by this point, a huge amount of pressure, and just pity poor Eisenhower and the weight of expectation. And it's very easy to sit back after the Sicilian campaign, and we all know that it was a success, and they won, and the Italians rolled over, and all the rest of it. But you don't know that. There's so many moving parts to this operation. There's so many things that could go wrong. You've got multiple nationalities, those 26 different invasion features. You've got glider troops, you've got airborne troops, you've got special forces in the SRS, you've got Canadians, Americans, US Army Rangers, you've got 8th Army. Have you got enough trucks? Have you got enough landing craft? Is the Navy going to be blown out of the water by the Luftwaffe and the Regia Aeronautica? You know, there's so much to worry about. And his record was 32 goddammits recorded and 4 blaster bastards in the run up to Operation Husky, which I think actually is quite.
Are you telling me there's a member of his staff actually was solely responsible for noting down the swear box? The Allied.
Yeah, this was his naval aide, whose name is momentarily gone out of my mind. But who kept a diary. He was an old PR guy, and he was given an honorary rank of lieutenant commander in the US Navy, and basically kind of paid there to be Eisenhower's chum and kind of, you know, foil when he wanted to kind of let off a bit of steam. And he kept a diary throughout the whole time, and he recorded that. And I always thought that always makes me like Eisenhower a little bit more.
Yeah, no, it is a great point. And when we look at Normandy later on, he's got a staff been working on it for years effectively. And as you made the point earlier, this is put together pretty damn quickly and lots of moving parts. It's a plate spinning act with uncertainty about where the plates are and where they're going to fall and all those other things, if I carry on that analogy. But great point. So let's carry on. Number 5.
Okay.
Number
6, I think this is now.
Yeah.
So number 6 is the Mafia. Were the Mafia involved? There's lots of sort of myth around this and all the rest of it. To my mind, they absolutely were. And there's all sorts of reasons why. First of all, Lucky Luciano had been employed by the U.S. Navy intelligence services, even though he was in prison, to help guard the U.S. port, the New York Port Authority and the port facilities. And even though he was doing that from prison, Vito Genovese was his right-hand man who had fled America just a couple of years before and gone back to Italy. Lucky Luciano also was Sicilian, was born in Sicily. And Vito Genovese was his right-hand man who had gone to Italy beforehand and was in Sicily. And sort of, once they landed, absolutely kind of unveiled his way into American and allied civil affairs and the civil affairs officers. And the guy who was in charge of the civil affairs in Palermo, in the western half of Sicily, was a chap called Charles Paletti, Colonel Charles Paletti. And Colonel Charles Paletti had been governor of New York beforehand, so absolutely knew these people. And of course, as his surname suggests, he's an Italian American. And to me, it's inconceivable that they wouldn't use the Mafia. So they know that the Mafia has been oppressed by Mussolini, has been made pretty dormant. And the leading Mafia figure in Sicily at the time is a chap called Don Carlo Vizzini. And he's an extraordinary character. And there's absolutely no question that he is involved in encouraging Sicilians in the western half of the island to lay down their arms. Now, as it turns out, they weren't needed. They didn't need to do that. But they were absolutely in contact beforehand. And what's really interesting is this other guy, this young Italian, Sicilian, who had been recruited into the OSS, which is a forerunner, of course, of the CIA. And I suppose it's kind of rougher comparison is with SOE. And this guy, Max Corvo, is absolutely determined that, because he's from the eastern part of Sicily and they're very anti-mafia there. He's from a little town called Melilli, which is on the east, just overlooking the east coast, just south of Catania. And when he's recruited, he says, "Look, I can harness all these people in Sicily and get them to help us and provide intelligence and all the rest of it." And his superiors go, "Well, wouldn't it be a good idea to kind of harness the Mafia?" And he goes, "Absolutely not. The Mafia are corrupt, they're evil. The last thing you can ever do is get the Mafia involved." Well, what's really interesting is when he finally gets to North Africa and he's ready for going in and enacting his grand plan, everybody puts all these obstacles in his way. So he's told to turn up to Bizerta on a particular day, gets there, and they go, "Oh God, you're 3 days late. You're supposed to be here 2 days ago," and all this kind of stuff. And when he finally gets to Italy, no one's interested in him. And every obstacle that's put in his way of progress, of trying to get his little army of agents, Sicilian agents, is kind of put in front of his way. So he gets absolutely nowhere. And what's really interesting is he writes this really, 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 really boring autobiography. But what is absolutely clear in his autobiography is that he's been absolutely run ragged by people further up the chain who have obviously decided that his idea is completely crap and it's much better to use the Mafia, which is why they're putting all these obstacles. They just don't want him anywhere near it. But they're kind of, he's already in the OSS and, they're kind of paying lip service to him. But even though he's an intelligence officer, he can't see this, and he can't even see this when he's writing his memoir kind of 20 years later. Wow. And it's absolutely startlingly obvious that there's all these people trying to kind of put obstacles in his way. It's very, very funny, actually. But I don't think there's any doubt that they use the Mafia. And the price for that is a kind of devil's pact, because the Mafia has been dormant and it absolutely runs amok afterwards. Its tentacles very, very quickly spread and are part of all Allied civil affairs. Vito Genovese subsequently then becomes Paletti's man in Naples when he takes over the civil affairs of Naples in late 1943, early 1944, runs a complete black market racket, drugs racket, all the rest of it. The Mafia are completely rehabilitated because of the harnessing of the Allies for Operation Husky. You can understand why the Allies do it, because they're interested in winning the war as quickly as possible, and they're going to take anything that they possibly can to help them. And they know that the Mafia is very anti-Mussolini, very anti-fascist, very pro-Allies. And so why wouldn't you make most of them, which is what they do. But it's still shrouded in a lot of myth. But you have to, for my money, there's absolutely no doubt about it whatsoever.
Yeah, there's an Italian historian who's written about it, who I'm going to try and bring on the channel at some point, who's done a whole book about the Mafia in Sicily, which
Cosa Nostra, great book.
Yeah, but amazing story. But yeah, thank you. That's a brilliant one. So moving on.
So where are we now? We're on to 7, aren't we? So yeah, I should probably do Operation Mincemeat. Well, it's a great book. It's a great story. The Man Who Never Was, or The Man with No Name, or whatever that first film was, I thought was fantastic. By all accounts, the musical that's on the West End in London is absolutely brilliant. I thought the most recent movie was just absolutely risible. It was just too awful for words. The truth is about Mincemeat is Mincemeat has to be seen in a bigger deception plan which is going on in the Mediterranean. And so one of the operations is Operation Animals, where there are 32 different sabotage operations going on in Greece, which are all part of the operations that are being run by Dudley Clark, who is the maestro of deception in the Mediterranean during this period. And he's pretty cross about the double cross committee, the XX committee being involved in this, because they're obviously doing that from London, and that's slightly kind of mucking around with what he's doing from the Mediterranean. And also Clark is really, really pissed off about Mincemeat, because it's so obvious that he thinks the Germans can't possibly fall for it, and it might actually scupper. It might do the absolute very opposite of what it's supposed to do. Now, what's really interesting about Mincemeat is the body is found. They do find the documents. The documents do get all the way to the OKW, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the German High Command. It does get to Hitler and all the rest of it. But all it does is reinforce what Hitler already thinks, which is that the Allies are going to invade, Sardinia and Greece. And that's because that is what Hitler is most concerned about. And the reason he's most concerned about the Balkans is because that is his only supply of real oil comes from Romania and Plesny. And that's why he's so paranoid about it. But no one else thinks that. And the reason no one else thinks that is because realistically, there is nowhere else the Allies could land other than Sicily, because of the constraints of air reach and air power. Because you need fighter cover to do an amphibious invasion. And fighter cover can reach just about from northeast Tunisia and can reach from Malta, and it can just about get to Sardinia, but only at an absolute push. But it certainly can't get to Greece, and you certainly can't get to southern Italy from there. So Kesselring, Mussolini, none of these senior commanders for 1 minute think that it's going to be anywhere other than Sicily, and they're absolutely right, because it's so darn obvious. So Mincemeat doesn't change the course of the war. Yes, okay, a Panzer division gets ready and moves into the Balkans, but that was going to go there anyway. So the idea that this big game changer is just absolute nonsense.
We love the minutiae of the plan. It's like one of those things brought to the Dragon's Den. It's a brilliant idea, but it has no use. It's absolutely brilliant, but no one's going to buy it. We love the intricacy of the plan. Yeah. No real effect. But yeah, Mincemeat, I'm glad you addressed it because it came up in the sidebar. So moving on, number 8.
Yeah, number 8. Well, this is the Airborne, and this is just a so much store was put by the Allies in airborne operations and the potential of Airborne, and there's no question that they were dazzled by the successes of airborne operations by the Germans at the start of the war in 1940. Ebene Mail, glider operations, Fallschirmjäger paratrooper operations in Belgium and Holland, and also, of course, in Crete as well. But what the Allies were doing is they were taking the good bits and not looking at the kind of potential shortcomings and getting very carried away. And the truth is that they trained up all these troops who were highly motivated, volunteers, capable of using their own initiative, really, really good troops, but they were being delivered to the battle zone by some of the least trained air crews. And that's a problem, because your number one air crews went to become bomber pilots or fighter pilots and not transport pilots. And glider pilots just hadn't been trained enough. They just hasn't been trained to do what they needed to do. And I think they'd had something like the glider pilots that were used for the British glider operations on D-Day of Operation Husky. I think they'd done one bit of night training ever. And most of the pilots had only flown something like half a dozen training flights, and it just wasn't enough. And then there were some high winds, and the whole thing just ran amok. So out of 144 gliders that we used, only 2 landed where they were supposed to, one of which was destroyed. And only 12 got anywhere close, and 69 were lost in the sea. And what is amazing is the Ponta Grande, which was the main target for that glider operation, was effectively achieved by 2 gliders worth of one glider worth of troops to start off with. I mean, it's an incredible achievement, and there's testimony to the quality of the troops and perhaps the lack of quality of the Italian defenders. But whichever way you look at it, ultimately the glider operation was a success because it did what it needed to do. But the wastage, the loss of life, the loss of crews was just absolutely appalling. And the same applied for this 82nd Airborne Division. I think it was the 504th, or was it 505th? I can't remember the top of my head. There was landed. It was one parachute infantry regiment. And of the 3,405 that were dropped by parachute on D-Day, only 200, less than 200, actually got to Granadippo, which is a sort of a bit of a high ground just behind Gela, which is where they were supposed to be on D-Day night. And again, they did what they needed to do. But, so it's testimony to the quality of the troops. But you have to see it as a failure. Meanwhile, the SRS, the former SAS, are delivered to Capo Muro di Porco, which is this little jutting bit that sticks out with these Italian naval batteries, gun batteries on there, just south of Syracuse. Absolutely key for protecting that's neutralized before anyone attempts to try and take Syracuse or does the landings further south at Avila and so on. And they are 100% successful. They do. It's a prong, a bit like Pont de Hoc. They have to climb up the thing. They have to attack from both sides. They don't. It doesn't work out. They all end up on the same side. But it's completely successful. 1 dead, 2 wounded, and they take out 6 different gun batteries effectively.
Yeah, no, I mean
it's a phenomenal performance.
It's funny how we talk about the Airborne, because I did 2 shows last week. So Colonel Vlahos went through the troop carriers, and he pushes back a little bit about the fact that the glider pilots were undertrained and things like that. He was saying it's more the 4-ship formation. It was more to do with planning. And Marty Morgan, the eminent Marty Morgan, said the 82nd Airborne, they proved what they could do in terms of that platoon ability to get on behind. The plan was kind of shitty, and the delivery wasn't very good, but in essence they prove what they can do. And James Gavin comes out of it kind of, there's a core thing here, because it was the first divisional use of paratroopers, where everything in North Africa had been battalion and companies.
Absolutely.
So it's funny how over the years we can look at those things as we can either focus on the negative aspects or the positive aspect, because there's clearly both involved in these airborne operations.
Absolutely. But I think what's interesting is that everyone's got completely carried away with airborne, and we have to have airborne because all our landing craft are being used for other things. But actually, what you're talking about here is dismantling key enemy strong points on the coast.
Yeah.
And a far more effective way to do it would be to use these special forces, land them by night, by stealth, in boats, so that you're delivering them all to where they need to be, pretty much within a kind of half-mile difference. And then they can do what they need to do. The problem with landing gliders in Sicily is there's lots and lots of stone walls, and anyone who's looking at the aerial photographs can tell you that. And the glider pilots are undercooked. They just are. It's not that there's anything wrong with them. It's just they haven't done enough. And there's high winds. Everything is working against it, which is why it's so remarkable that they actually do achieve what they achieve.
Yeah, definitely.
With very, very few numbers, which tells you there's nothing wrong with the troops. The troops are absolutely bang on. So if you can just deliver them more effectively to where you need them to be delivered, you're onto a winner. And in retrospect, I would have, again, it's easy to be wise after the event. I think there's a case for delivering more of those special forces by boat, by landed craft, than by air. Anyway, but it's fascinating. It's a fascinating part of the campaign, and it's not the last bit of airborne operations either, because obviously then more Americans are dropped subsequent nights and then shot at by the Navy. There's Operation Husky, of course. There's the commandos are also landed on the coast and have to take out bridges. So there's other special operations going on in Sicily. So where we are, we're up to 9 now.
9 now, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll just mention Headley Verity. One of the things I think is so interesting about the Second World War is the number of very, very famous people that end up getting caught up in it. You normal works of life, you wouldn't. I mean, just imagine there was a war now. I mean, you're seeing this in Ukraine with tennis stars and and ice hockey stars suddenly finding themselves in the front line. It's exactly the same in the Second World War, whether it's Jimmy Stewart flying B-24 Liberators, or I don't know,
David Niven,
etc., etc. But Headley Verity was arguably the greatest slow bowler, spin bowler that England have ever produced. An amazing Test cricketer, joined up out of conviction, moral belief in his moral duty, landed with the 1st Green Howards, and was mortally wounded, leading his company, B Company of the 1st Green Howards, in attack on the night of the 19th, 20th of July across the Catania Plain. Was struck down and was captured by the Germans, operated on in very rough conditions, then put on a truck, taken up to Messina, put on a ferry, taken on a train, taken to Caserta, had a broken rib pressing on his lung the whole time, eventually got septicemia and died 10 days later. An absolute tragedy. I'm enough to go out and work out exactly where this happened, where he killed. And you can't get to the very small, mortally wounded one. You can't get to the actual spot because it's now a Mafia-owned orange plantation. But you can get pretty close, and you can absolutely work it out using Google Earth and battalion hand-drawn maps of the day from the war diaries and all the rest of it, and you can pin out what's happened. And the truth of the matter is, the reason he gets killed is because his B company is doing better than C and I think it's A company that are on his flank, and they're too far ahead, and they're being pincered by machine guns and mortars either side of them. And the tragedy is that Miles Dempsey, who was 13 Corps commander at the time, is a massive cricket fan and played in a match in the Canal Zone in Egypt before they set sail, and played against Headley Verity, and Verity got him out, and they got talking, and he really liked the cut of his jib, and he planned to take him out of the greenhouse and put him on his staff after this attack. And had he done so, he'd have been there probably on his staff for the Second Army in Normandy and D-Day and throughout the whole of the rest of the Northwest European campaign. But it wasn't to be, and so he died. And actually, I finally got to see his grave last year in Caserta, and very moving it was too. But I like giving a little nod to Headley when we're talking about Sicily, because he's one of those people that, you think, God, there's the grave under a kind of, under a sort of hot, burnished sun in southern Italy, and what a long way from Headingley that is, and and Lords and those Test matches that he dazzled so many people in.
No, thank you for that one. And again, reminding us that in all the talk about planning and air power, it is always blokes running across fields getting chopped down by the enemy. That's what it comes down to. So thank you for that. Number 10, final one.
Yeah, well, the final one actually is at the end of the campaign. And one of the reasons why there's such a downer on the whole thing, despite the fact that the whole island is won in kind of 38 days, which I think is incredible. When you ever, if you haven't actually been to Sicily, go there. And I can promise you, stand on the top of these brutal hilltop battles that the Allies had to fight, and look out and go, 38 days for taking this island. That's pretty darn good. Don't be an armchair historian on this one. Reserve your judgment until you've been there, because this is an absolutely brutal bitch of a place in which to fight. It's bad to defend. It's even worse to attack in. And the downer is that 39,569 German troops managed to get away, and 62,000 Italians, plus around kind of 10,000 vehicles in all. That has to be deconstructed a little bit, because of those that nearly 40,000 German troops, only about 25,000 are frontline troops, the frontline division troops, the rest is kind of service troops and what have you. So that's not that many in the big scheme of things. You know, when you think there were kind of 5 divisions, what was it, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 4 divisions, German divisions used in Sicily. There's a hell of a lot that were left behind, is the truth of the matter. And I think some perspective has to be put into this. You know, the Straits of Messina are very, very narrow. You know, the narrowest points are only about 1.5 miles, and most of the crossing points are only about kind of 2 or 3 miles. 333 anti-aircraft guns and coastal guns rained along that stretch, either side, on the Reggio side, in the toe of Italy, and on the Sicilian side. That's a hell of a lot of anti-tank guns and heavy guns when you consider there's only 32 guns of 88 millimeter above on the coast of Normandy during the invasion. 333 is a hell of a lot. And then you think about historically about evacuations. Well, pretty much every evacuation in the Second World War is successful. You know, look at Dunkirk, 338,000. You know, look at Greece. You know, what's that? That's kind of 42,000 out of 46,000, something like that. You know, that's pretty good. Even Crete, it's 19,000 out of 32,000. And then you look at the evacuation of East Prussia at the end of the Second World War by Germans. 2 million German refugees managed to escape, despite having almost no ships and no transportation. They managed to escape the clutches of the Soviets at the very end of the war, which tells you that evacuations generally are pretty successful and they're pretty hard to stop. I would say that getting across the Straits of Messina stopping that is next to impossible, because you can't go in low because of the amount of guns. Naval can't go in there because they haven't neutralized those guns. You know, as Nelson says, you know, a ship to attack a coast is a fool's business, or worse to that effect. And you have to think about the geography of Sicily, which is this very, very thin tapering of the northeast corner of the island, which absolutely aids the defender, because as you're pulling back, your line of defense in that northeast corner is getting narrower and narrower and narrower as it comes to that point, which enables you to filter out more and more troops, and while your last troops are kind of holding that line as it's getting ever smaller. So I don't think you could possibly look at this as a black mark to the Allies. I think you have to really be in awe of what was achieved logistically in terms of this coordination of air, land, and naval power, in terms of the speed with which they do it. 38 days on an island that size and that complexity, I think, is pretty good. One of the reasons they do it the way they do it is because the Italians have completely shot their bolt by that point, and there just aren't enough German troops to do what they need to do. And so that's how it pans out. So you have to kind of think about Axis weakness as much as you do Allied strengths. But Sicily, the terrain absolutely favours the defender. And if that's true on Sicily, of course, it's double, quadruply true on mainland Italy. But of course, that's a whole other story. But I think Sicilian campaign is a massive tick for the Allies, not a black mark.
No, definitely. You've left us hanging. We'll bring you back later on when we look at the invasion of Italy and all the things that go wrong there. But yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic campaign, and I realize you've taken a lot of time out of your busy schedule. So, folks, if you haven't got it already, go and get James's book on Sicily and all the others as well. It's worth doing. So, yeah. But back to the podcast, back to the event. So, what's up for you right now? Too many things going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you brilliantly came and helped out with the first episode of Hidden Histories of World War II, which we're filming at the moment, and we're doing another episode at the moment, which is all about the advent of the Mustang and 30 against 1. Major Jim Howard winning his Congressional Medal of Honor on the 11th of January 1944. So that's what I'm filming at the moment. Brilliant.
Well, folks, we'll do questions some other time when we've got James a bit more time to spend with us. But I will see you again at some point. If I don't see you before, I'll see you. We have ways in September. And thanks for joining us. And folks, I'll be back with you again in an hour and a quarter with Mark Zilke to talk about the Canadian contribution. So thanks, everybody. See you later. Massive. Which was massive. Yeah. That's it. We've done it now. It was massive. I'll tell Mark we've done it. It was massive. It was fun. Anyway, thanks, James. Thanks, everybody. See you all later. Bye, everybody.
Cheers.